Hi, my name is Alex LeMan. Welcome to Shadow Whispers, where silence speaks and the dark remembers. This is a place for those who don't just want to hear horror, but to feel it settle under the skin. Here, the fear isn't loud, it lingers, it waits. Some stories are true, some never should be, but all of them leave a mark. So, turn down the lights, trust no sound, and let's begin. The Path That Never Returns. Chapter 1. The Camera at the Bottom of the Suitcase. The heat that draped over Dawes, Louisiana, in late July felt heavier than any human sorrow. Yet, Stephen Parrish's grief still managed to outweigh it. His Aunt Lila's old shotgun house stood on the edge of juniper marsh like a forgotten apology, sun-bleached clapboard, windows clouded by algae, the porch sagging where termites had eaten the joists into latticework. Kudzu throttled the porch rails and Spanish moss dangled from pecans in mourning veils. Cicadas should have screamed, but the air held only a dense, syrupy hush, as though the swamp had drowned its own insects. Stephen stepped inside and met a smell he half remembered: camphor chest, boiled crawfish, and the sweet rot of wood that never truly dried. Dust waited in undisturbed drifts, yet the floorboards showed fresh crescents where furniture had been dragged recently. He ignored the shiver this observation sent up his arms and began the chore Lila's will demanded: sorting, cataloging, discarding. An antique steamer trunk crouched in the back bedroom, its brass corners corroded to verdigris. Mold stippled its leather top in the shape of blooming bruises. The latch stuck, and when it finally snapped free, the sound cracked the silence like breaking bone. Inside lay evening gowns wrapped in wax paper, a mildewed scrapbook, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a rag that had once been a christening blanket, a 1970s Super 8 camera. Heavy, warm, faintly sticky with residue. Stephen ran a thumb across the lens and felt it grate as if glass beneath had warped. The suitcase lining beneath the camera was damp, though nothing else inside was wet. Small rings of moisture stained the fabric in a pattern resembling ripple marks on a pond. Beneath the camera lay a single reel of undeveloped film in a metal canister. Scrawled in marker across the lid, "Do not watch alone." The handwriting resembled Lila's, except for a curious tremor in the stroke, as if the writer's hand had been guided or restrained. Stephen set the reel aside and pulled the camera to the window. Sunlight struck the viewfinder and refracted across the room, illuminating dust motes that drifted slower than gravity allowed. He pressed the viewfinder to his eye, expecting darkness. Instead, he saw the bedroom exactly as it stood, but overlaid with faint water stains that crept across the wallpaper like advancing tide marks. In the image, his own reflection was absent, replaced by wavering darkness shaped like a doorway standing open behind where he physically stood. When he lowered the camera, the stains and the doorway vanished, leaving only peeling floral print. Unease spread beneath his ribs in sick tidal pulls, yet curiosity drew him onward. He rewound the film lever. The mechanism moved too smoothly for a machine dormant 20 years. The whir sounded wet, as though turning gears inside a throat. Then the camera clicked off. A thin bead of water seeped from the battery hatch and rolled over his knuckle, warm as blood. Outside, a sudden gust rattled the bare pecan branches, though the air inside remained windless. On the floor he noticed a trail of darkened footprints, small, barefoot, leading from the front door to the trunk. They glistened as though freshly lifted from the surface of a pond. Each print contained a single bubble that quivered before bursting without sound, releasing the faint odor of brackish water. When Stephen touched the floor beside one print, the boards were bone dry. He opened the bedroom closet to fetch towels and found the back wall soaked, the plaster crumbling in ribbons. Embedded in the rot was a Polaroid photograph, pre-sun faded yet damp. The shot showed Lila 40 years younger, standing knee-deep in marsh water beneath the same pecans, eyes fixed on something beyond the frame. Behind her, in the still surface of the water, the distorted reflection of a child hovered, features unclear, arms raised as if reaching toward the lens. Stephen tried peeling the photo free, but it tore along the child's outline, leaving a gap that oozed a single line of brown marsh water down the closet wall. He replaced the camera in the trunk, closed the lid, and wiped his palms on his jeans, finding them smeared with silt that smelled of river bottom. Outside, daylight had dimmed, though the sun still rode high. The yard lay beneath a gray inversion layer, thick enough to press the treetops downward. Somewhere in that oppressive quiet, a drop of water fell, then another, striking the roof with the measured pace of footsteps. Stephen listened, counting each impact until a third heavy thud landed directly above the bedroom ceiling, far too weighty to be rain, far too deliberate to be wind-tossed limb. A second thud followed, closer to the attic hatch. Then silence returned, sprawling and expectant. Stephen's pulse lurched in his throat. The camera clicked open inside the trunk, though no hand touched it, and the damp film reel rolled out, bumping once against the floorboards before coming to rest at his feet, label facing upward like a mandate he could no longer refuse. Chapter 2. Footprints in Water. That should not exist. Twilight bled into the marsh like diluted ink, and the boundaries between land and water dissolved under a rising film of humidity. Stephen stepped onto the warped back porch, needing breath that did not carry the attic's rot. The boards sagged under his weight, exhaling mildew, and twilight insects should have lifted their chorus by now, yet the landscape remained as mute as a paused tape. Across the yard, juniper marsh stretched in streaks of iron-colored water and black grass, its surface untroubled by breeze or ripple. A slick path of dampness crept from the porch steps through the crabgrass toward the swamp. Stephen traced it with a flashlight. The beam quivered across each blade, revealing a gleam like oil. Where the coarse grass gave way to mud, he saw the first footprint, small, naked, toes splayed, edges filled with clear water that reflected the darkening sky. 10 inches ahead lay the next print, equally perfect, as though pressed by deliberate, measured steps. They marched in single file toward deeper water, where cypress knees jutted like drowned gravestones. He knelt beside the first impression and pressed a finger to the puddled center. The water felt lukewarm, wrong for evening air losing heat. When he withdrew his hand, a thin thread of clear slime stretched from fingertip to footprint. Slime that snapped and coiled back into the print like elastic, erasing every disturbance to restore the surface mirror smooth. Stephen followed the prints to the marsh edge. The ground here behaved like flesh on bone, firm and instant, then yielding in soft gulps. The footprints continued forward into water inches above ankle height, yet the line of prints never deepened. Each remained crisp, arch and heel, perfectly defined beneath the rippling mirror. They formed a shining corridor that pierced the cattails, terminating at a wider pool where the marsh widened into open water. There, the footprints simply ceased, as if the walker had been lifted upward from the surface. The pool itself reflected only bruised purple sky until the windless mirror began to vibrate, rings spreading outward from an invisible impact at its center. He felt an impulse to step back, but behind him the grass glistened wetter than moments before, hemming him between dark water and sodden yard. Night descended with shocking speed, shearing away color until the scene fell into monochrome. The flashlight seemed to weaken, its circle shrinking. Within its pale circumference, something small floated toward him. a plastic pearl button from an infant's clothing, pitted by age, yet gleaming with the sheen of fresh spit. It brushed his boot and sank, leaving barely a wrinkle on the surface. The air thickened with scent. Iron tang of old blood, sweet rot of cattails, and a faint note of camphor recalling Lila's cedar chest. From the cattail wall rose a single reed, taller than the rest, bending despite the still air. Its tip pointed back toward the house as though selecting it. Stephen turned. The shotgun house stood darker than night, windows blacked by interior condensation. On the second-floor pane where the attic hatch opened, moisture traced broad handprints from inside, the streaks descending in pairs as if an unseen body slid inch by inch against the glass. Lightning flickered without thunder over distant bayous, illuminating the house and yard. For a freeze-frame instant, the footprints behind him multiplied, radiating in every direction like spokes, none leading back to the porch. Another flash revealed thin strands of pale fabric tangled on porch rails, gauzy, soaked, torn as if ripped from a garment in retreat. The marsh surface popped with rising air bubbles, dozens at once, as though the ground beneath exhaled. Each bubble burst in a whisper that blended into others, generating a sound almost linguistic. Overlapping sibilants, a collective soft command to come back. Stephen stumbled onto the soggy lawn, shoes sucking free with wet smacks, and every retreating step filled with water so fast it looked like the ground swallowed him ankle-deep. Under the porch light, dim and jaundiced, he halted. The camera reel he had left upstairs now rested on the top step, metal case sweating beads that slid like tears. Beside it lay 3 new Polaroids, edges curling from moisture. The first showed the exact footprints he had just followed, but taken in daylight. The second displayed the back view of himself kneeling by the first print, an image impossible, captured minutes ago from a vantage inside the cattails. The third Polaroid was blank, except for a handwritten timestamp, marking precisely 2 hours into the future. A cold certainty settled in his stomach. In 2 hours, another photograph would exist, and it would record whatever kept walking once the prints vanished underwater. Behind him, the marsh emitted a single hollow glug, like something large withdrawing through mud. The flashlight sputtered out, plunging the yard into a night so dense that even the fireflies refused to spark. A lone drip echoed off the tin roof, then another, then a third, each drip matching the beat of his pulse, as if something overhead timed its descent to his terror. Chapter 3. The Rustle. Insight. Old wood moonlight never fully reached Juniper Marsh, yet an anemic glow seeped through the warped shingles as Stephen re-entered the shotgun house. The air inside felt years older than outside air, as though the walls hoarded stale time. Damp boards creaked underfoot, but another lighter friction answered from somewhere within the skeleton of the house, a hush of movement too consistent for rodents, too soft for settling timber. He slipped the latch on the back door, hoping a barrier might stifle the marsh's reach. Yet humidity already slicked every surface. Wallpaper peeled in long curls, exposing lath beneath, and through those seams he heard the skitter of something clawless dragging along plaster. It traveled swiftly, always a foot beyond his flashlight beam, following him room to room like a thought he could not finish. In the parlor, he found the antique steamer trunk open again, lid fully upright, though he recalled hearing the clasp snap shut. The Super 8 camera lay on the floorboards, lens pointed toward the ceiling as if recording the attic joists. Around it, concentric rings of dust-free wood radiated, as though many bodies had paced a ritual circle in silence. Where dust remained, it formed letters no larger than fingernails, tiny etched spirals repeating the name Lila over and over until the grain blurred. The rustle inside the walls changed pitch, mimicking a long exhale, then halted altogether. From underneath the floor rose a new noise, scraping cloth, wet and heavy, as though waterlogged fabric were being pulled through a narrow gap. Stephen crouched, pressing an ear to the plank. The wood chilled his skin like metal. Beneath, an unmistakable heartbeat thudded, slow, patient, vibrating the nails that held the house together. With each beat, the porch light outside flickered, syncing interior and exterior in a physiological rhythm. He backed away and ascended the narrow staircase, its steps spongy, smelling of drowned forests. Halfway up, the banister trembled under his hand and exhaled a puff of cold air through unseen cracks. The rustle resumed above, sprinting from one end of the attic to the other, followed by a thud. Something dropping, rolling, stopping. When Stephen reached the attic hatch, the silence thickened. Even the swamp's muted noises had died, as if all living things were holding breath. He pushed the hatch. Hinges wept black runnels that stained his wrists. The attic smelled of pond bottom and camphor, so sodden that insulation sagged like meringue. In the center sat a wooden baby cradle, paint blistered, rockers fused to the warped floor. It had not been there earlier. Inside, the cradle rested rows of Polaroid photographs propped like headstones, dozens, all showing the same image. Stephen's silhouette, filmed through slats in the floor as he knelt somewhere below. On the back of each Polaroid, a timestamp advanced by minutes toward an hour he had not yet lived. A whisper flickered through the attic. Not vocal cords, but wood grain vibrating. Boards bulged as though inhaling. Narrow slits widened into eyes of pitch darkness. Within the cradle, the photographs curled inward, corners lifting, as if heat rose from cradled emptiness. Stephen's flashlight sputtered. In the strobing half-light he saw the cradle rock once, then again, carving grooves into the damp planks. He stepped back and his heel broke through the attic floor. His foot plunged into wetness up to the ankle. Yet the second story lay 12 feet above ground. He yanked free. Sock and shoe dripped marsh water and pale larvae that writhed until they dissolved into vapor. Below, the second-floor hall began oozing water through keyholes, pooling into mirrored puddles that reflected the attic rather than the ceiling. In those reflections, figures gathered, thin, childlike, faces blotted into white voids, each holding a Polaroid camera aimed upward. The rustle in the walls converged toward the staircase, boards buckling outward as if letting something pass. Stephen slammed the hatch closed. Loose photographs fluttered up like startled birds, their images fading mid-air into blank squares. The heartbeat under the house resumed, faster now, pounding in uneven rhythms, and each pulse forced water through floor seams in spurts that splashed Stephen's calves and steamed on contact with lamp-warm air. Downstairs, the camera shutter clicked 3 times, though no one touched it. The rustle ceased. Silence returned, but it was not empty. It clenched the house like a second set of walls, narrowing every room. Stephen realized the hush itself was a corridor, funneling him, not out, but deeper, toward whatever waited below the threshold of dry land and forgotten family stories. Behind him, the cradle rocked a final time and stopped, pointing its open mouth toward the hatch as if offering the only route forward. Chapter 4. The One Who Waited Beneath the Surface. The house no longer felt anchored to the earth. It breathed like a barge cut loose, groaning as invisible currents tugged at its pilings. Stephen fought the urge to barricade himself in the attic and instead forced his way downstairs through calf-deep water that pulsed with each subterranean heartbeat. The flashlight beam jittered across walls blooming with lichen, revealing photographs he did not remember taking. Images of him sleeping in childhood bedrooms, brushing his teeth at age 9, hunched over homework at 14. Each print dripped marsh water, smearing his younger face into a mask of mildew. A path of these photos led to the back door, as if the house itself curated a memory lane to usher him out. Outside, Juniper Marsh glimmered under a half-moon veiled in mossy haze. The water line had crept far beyond its usual bounds, swallowing the lawn and converting pecan trunks into lonely islands. Cattails bowed beneath their own damp weight, forming arches over a newly formed channel. An invitation cut straight through the reeds. Stephen waded forward, hypnotized by a current that flowed against gravity toward the house, yet parted for him like a sluggish tide. Under the surface, white filaments drifted past, first one or two, then clusters twisting together. They resembled drowned hair until he noticed tiny vertebrae glinting inside. These were spinal columns of catfish stripped clean, knit into braids that pointed deeper into the marsh. The footprints from earlier had filled with dark water, but each now emitted a faint green luminescence, lighting a silent procession across the shallows. Stephen's chest tightened. Bioluminescence did not occur in freshwater bogs, but his own boots glowed where water touched leather, as though he walked on spilled starlight. With every step, the glow brightened, and the marsh clarified, revealing silhouettes beneath. Door frames, iron bedsteads, entire furniture pieces half embedded in muck like relics of a sunken household. Amid them knelt a figure shrouded in a drenched muslin gown. She faced away, gathering silt with skeletal fingers, shaping it into something unseen. Stephen spoke no word. Language felt brittle here, yet the figure responded, tilting her head in the impossible angle of a marionette yanked by tangled strings. Her hair clung to her shoulders in pelt-like mats, and when she rose, water sheeted from hollow spaces where flesh should have been. Instead of a face, she bore a blurred plane of skin, as if a Polaroid mid-developed had been scrubbed. In her cupped hands lay a mess of damp negatives, edges curled, images stripped to ghost outlines. She released them. They fluttered onto the marsh surface and floated toward Stephen, arranging themselves to form a continuous strip. In the negative frames, he saw himself kneeling at this very spot, only moments ahead in time, arms submerged to the elbows, handing something precious to the faceless woman. The marsh shivered. An antediluvian belch of methane rolled up from the peat, and the water temperature spiked, fogging his flashlight lens. Beneath, the drowned furniture vibrated, bumping against each other in muffled clanks. Then, as if some ancient sluice gate failed, the ground beneath Stephen collapsed. He plunged waist-deep into a pit of liquid peat that sucked the heat from his bones. The flashlight slipped, beam spiraling downward to reveal a vast cavity under the marsh, its ceiling supported by timber posts gnawed wafer-thin. Against that ceiling clung dozens of muslin-clad shapes, their garments billowing like inverted jellyfish, waiting for gravity's permission. The faceless woman glided closer, water never rippling around her knees. She extended one arm, the muslin sleeve split, revealing no bones within, only a lattice of writhing negatives bound by hair-thin reeds. Her hand unfolded like wet paper, palm up, demanding tribute. Stephen's pocket pulsed. Inside, the Super 8 film canister throbbed like a second heart. Against all instinct, he withdrew it. The canister sweated the same green luminescence now leaking from his boots. He realized the film was no longer metal but soft, like a mollusk shell warmed by blood. The woman reached, but her hand did not grasp. Instead, negatives detached from her wrist fluttered around the canister and cocooned it. Each frame flashed an image, Stephen at different ages handing the film forward, a loop feeding itself. The cocoon tightened, burst, and sank, dragging Stephen's hand underwater. Pain lanced his arm, thousands of pinpricks, as unseen barbs hooked flesh. Above, the attic cradle's slow rock manifested in the water as rolling pressure waves. Shapes on the cavity ceiling unfolded, dropping silently into the pit, their impact muffled yet heavy enough to quake mud walls. Stephen wrenched free, tearing skin, and scrambled backward toward the Pecan Islands. The faceless woman did not pursue, she only watched, tilting her head farther until the neck creaked like a film reel reaching its end. At the bank, Stephen hauled himself onto a carpet of moss that quivered with each subterranean heartbeat. Behind him, the marsh closed, water rising to erase footprints, furniture, and glowing bones in one slow swallow. The moon sank into fog, extinguishing its reflection, leaving only the faint glow of Stephen's lacerated arm, where new negatives developed beneath the skin, each frame capturing the next terrified moment he had yet to live. Chapter 5. The Thing That Remembered His Scent. The cut across Stephen's forearm blazed with fever as he stumbled onto the porch, every heartbeat printing new images beneath his skin, flickering shadows of future anguish blooming like bruises. The night air clung to him in clots, thick with iodine and sweet rot, as though the marsh had exhaled into his sweat-damp shirt. Behind the house, the water line advanced another yard, submerging the lowest porch step and carrying reeds that bowed toward him like accusatory fingers. Each gust hauled a raw stench of copper and wet burlap that belonged to no earthly decay. It smelled exactly like the darkness beneath the peat, a scent that had tasted his blood and now stalked its owner. Inside, the corridor lights tremored at irregular intervals, each pulse an echo of the subterranean heartbeat he could no longer separate from his own. Walls sweated a viscous film that slid to the floor and left snail trail streaks luminously green, where the ooze touched baseboards. Paint blistered outward, releasing curls of floral paper that fluttered to the ground and dissolved into pulp. Stephen's breath rasped shallow. Every inhalation delivered the metallic tang of old pennies, and beneath it a softer note, something floral and familiar, like his mother's gardenias pressed long ago between Bible pages. Memory sharpened into pain. That fragrance had wafted through the house the summer Lila miscarried, saturating every room until grief became botanical. The house had kept the scent and fed it back to him now, mingled with the reek of peat, proof that walls remembered everything a family tried to bury. Water seeped under door frames and lattices that crisscrossed the hall, converging on Stephen's muddy footprints. It rose around his boots, eddied, then retreated in thin rivulets, sampling him, carrying molecules of salt and fear back toward the marsh. Somewhere overhead, the attic cradle resumed its pendulum whisper, each creak matched by a gentle slosh beneath the floorboards, like oars dipping in a far-off boat. Stephen realized the house was breathing him in, learning the pattern of his sweat, mapping glands, pores, blood type. He lurched into the kitchen to rinse the wound, but the faucet coughed mud and tadpole tails, forcing him back. On the tabletop lay a Polaroid that had not existed moments earlier, an aerial view of the kitchen taken from a height impossible within the ceiling. In the image, he stood exactly where he now stood, except the marsh water at his ankles already reached his knees, and behind him loomed a contorted silhouette wearing his torn denim jacket like a borrowed skin. Sudden scratching erupted inside the pantry. A wet rustle, then a snort, as though nostrils tested the seam of the door. Paint around the jamb wrinkled and peeled back, exposing raw wood that swelled outward, pushed from within by something probing for daylight. Stephen retreated to the hall. Floorboards beneath him flexed, smelling of cedar, gardenias, and blood. The pantry door buckled, hinges shrieking as water jetted through new cracks, carrying with it slivers of black bone no larger than toothpicks, but barbed like hooks. Each shard vibrated on the linoleum, orienting toward Stephen's boots before sinking through gaps between tiles with worm-like insistence. He fled upstairs, yet the second-floor hall had transformed into a dim tunnel, lit by bioluminescent spores drifting like dust. Photographs of him at various ages were pinned to both walls, all having their eyes scissored out. Within each empty eye socket a small knot of swamp moss pulsed, inhaling the spores, exhaling the copper burlap scent. The moss expanded as he passed, tracking his movement like shutter apertures widening for more light. At the far end, the bathroom door sagged inward, water streaming from the handle as if the knob wept. Inside, the porcelain tub overflowed with black water that bulged above the rim in a convex lens yet never spilled. On its surface floated the broken Super 8 canister, now split open like a seed pod, releasing ribbons of undeveloped film that snaked around the overflow chain and slid silently down the drain. The film strips glistened, and on each frame the faint outline of Stephen's silhouette dissolved frame by frame, leaving only the space he inhabited, as if erasure happened in real time. A rasping inhalation rose from the drain, slow, intimate, savoring. The tub water lowered by inches, consumed gulp by deliberate gulp. Stephen backed away but slipped. His glowing arm plunged wrist deep into water that should have been ice but burned instead. In that brief submersion he felt something brush his skin, a tongue, wide and paper rough, sampling the slit wound as a sommelier sips from a glass. He jerked free. The water level dropped again, and a hush of satisfaction issued from the drain, followed by a single syllable exhaled on no human throat. Ready? Stephen ran. Behind him, doors bulged and burst, belching swamp water down the stairs. The tide pursued with predatory patience, not rushing but advancing at a pace that guaranteed exhaustion. Every breath reeked now of gardenias drowned in iron. On the walls, photographs metamorphosed, the absent eyes replaced by glossy negatives showing him in flight, frame after frame, as though the house documented its own hunt. At the stair landing, he hesitated. The main door already warped shut, locks submerged. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating a marsh now level with the windowsill. Between the pecan trunks, a vast ripple spread, and something massive lifted its back above the surface, moss-draped, faceless, inhaling a long, savoring breath as though it had finally memorized its quarry's scent and no longer feared losing the trail. Chapter 6. The One-Way Path. Rain never fell, yet water climbed stair by stair until it breached the second-floor windows and spilled across warped planks like a reversed waterfall. Stephen smashed the sash with a lamp and climbed onto the roof's sagging ridge. Juniper Marsh had swallowed every boundary: lawn, fence, gravel road, even the pecan trees now poked from a black mirror that merged lake and sky. Lightning crawled along the horizon, but cast no thunder, as though sound itself had been bartered away. In that sterile hush, a single strip of land appeared, narrow, rigid, impossibly straight. It rose from the water like an unspooled tongue, boards stitched from cypress heartwood too fresh to rot, yet weather-gray as if predating the swamp. Luminescent footprints, small, barefoot, childish, already marked the planks, heading east toward a stand of drowned pines. Stephen understood. The house would not spare him, the marsh would not relinquish him, but the path offered a choice dressed as mercy. His injured arm burned where negatives wriggled beneath the skin, urging him forward before the scent-drunk thing behind the trees noticed indecision. He stepped onto the boardwalk. Water lapped but never overtopped it, as if the marsh honored the path's immunity. Each plank accepted his weight, then pulsed, reading him like a finger on a vein. Behind, the shotgun house groaned, rafters collapsing inward with the finality of a chest exhaling its last breath. The roof slid into blackness and vanished without splash, erased as neatly as the faces in Lila's photographs. Windless air funneled along the boardwalk, thick with the perfume of crushed gardenias layered over fetid silt. Halfway across, Stephen spotted objects lodged between the planks: a rusted baby rattle, the lens cap of the Super 8, a sheriff badge so polished it reflected moonlight like a cat's eye. None had been there a breath earlier. He tried to quicken pace, yet the path altered itself. Every hurried step stretched the distance to shore, keeping the glimmering pines forever 200 yards ahead, as though he walked a treadmill built from memory. The water alongside stirred. Something huge broke the surface, only its crown visible, a mound of living negatives glued into the shape of a bowed head. It exhaled, releasing a ring of gardenia petals so pristine they glowed bone-white against tar water. The petals drifted to the boardwalk and charred on contact, etching Stephen's name in curling black script along the rail before flaking into ash. Panic sliced through stupor. He leapt from rail to rail, refusing the path's pace, and the plank beneath him cracked with a wet shriek. Through the gap, he saw not water, but the attic cradle rocking in slow motion beneath the marsh, its interior lined with glistening photographs shot from this very vantage. Each photo updated in real time, frames stuttering forward a second after he moved, proof the path recorded him even as it guided him. Dry ground finally rose ahead, a narrow hummock crowned by a single bald cypress, its trunk split to form a door-shaped hollow. Child-sized footprints vanished into that slit of darkness. Moss dripped from the opening in strands that quivered like breath. Stephen stepped onto the island. The boardwalk behind dissolved into mist, leaving no retreat. Inside the cypress hollow, air compressed, smelling of wet film stock and childhood closets. The walls were slick but warm, pulsing with a heartbeat slower than his own. Deeper in, the passage opened into a chamber lit by faint green fireflies that never moved. At its center knelt the faceless woman, muslin gown fused to bark, arms cradling the Super 8 camera, now alive with whirring reels. She angled the lens toward him, the glowing negatives under his skin aligned, tugging him forward with invisible threads. On the chamber floor lay a new boardwalk, this one carved from polished mahogany, leading downward at a gentle grade until swallowed by subterranean water. A brass plaque at the first step bore 2 words hammered deep: "Only forward." As Stephen read them, the chamber behind sealed, roots knitted together, and the woman's blank visage bent in a slow nod, granting permission or denying protest. It was unclear which. He placed a foot on the gleaming wood. Warm water licked the sole, scented of pennies and flowers. Far below, a muffled lullaby floated upward, its melody the exact pitch of his mother's voice when she sang him to sleep. The path dipped, promising darkness thick enough to erase light, sound, and memory. Behind him, roots tightened like a closing fist, and ahead the lullaby deepened, layered with new voices chanting his name. Stephen inhaled once, committing the last taste of night air to memory, though he suspected memory would not accompany him. Then he stepped forward, and the water met him like a mouth eager to reclaim a familiar taste. The boardwalk sank with him, plank by plank, until only faint ripples remained, a perfect mirror across which no footprints ever traveled back.